The nature of this video is to help you make some of the more complex maps that are being asked for and images in our geography for our grade 11 and 12 assessments. It asks for you in the ISMGs and to complete tasks to transform primary data and into graphs and to maps using spatial technologies and ICTs. And this is one way to do it. In this case, cartographic and graphical representations. In the ISMGs, usually underneath the communications section, they have a section of being able to do at least proficient transformation representation of geographical data and information, and then creates sophisticated, these are the A-level responses, cartographic and graphic forms. The idea of this video is for me to show you some of the ways to do that. There are a lot of online tools for you to use. There are full-on GISs like ArcGIS, but they may not always be necessary or what you're looking for at the time. So I'm going to show two mapping programs that use primary data from the Bureau of Statistics and a number of other data sources provided by the Australian governments. In this case, the first one I'm going to look at is the ID Community website. And that has a lot of councils from around Australia using their data in conjunction with the Bureau of Statistics data. That allows you to select certain maps based on certain demographic types, and the other one I'll show you will have more environmental data there. But whatever you want to happen to do and make, you can turn a pretty good map out using this method. It's not a perfect method, but it is a method, and it turns your humdrum sea level maps that are adequate to competent, and if done really well, to proficient. And that's what we're aiming for with this. So here I've selected up the top, I'm using the Social Atlas. I'm looking at the median mortgage payments for Rockhampton. And the reason I'm looking at that is I assigned my grade 11 students to do riverine flooding. So this is a possible thing they may look at, or any sort of demographic thing for livability for a little later in the year. I've chosen the 2016 census, and I have a thematic map that has numerical values. So if you actually hover over each section, you actually have the actual area, and then in this case, the amount of mortgage per week, which is to pay off for houses. Obviously, I can select smaller areas, and in this case, closer to the river would be more of what I'm looking for. And I can select here that there is quite a big variation in the types of mortgage payments. If I look down here, that I'm only seeing 216 per week. So some of this information can be pulled out and put into a table and maybe even graphed as well for risk and vulnerability. But for the moment, that's not my case. What I'll be looking at is using the snip tool. I'm going to come up and snip the map area that I want. So I'm going to try to capture the center part of Rockhampton up to about here, and I'm going to turn this into a map. Now, one of the things with mapping, as you know, you've been taught, you're supposed to have a bunch of geographical features on there to turn it from an image into a map. So one of the tricks I do with that is I use PowerPoint. Why do I use PowerPoint? Because I can turn it into a bunch of things, add a bunch of layers to it, and then I can snip it as an image or group it and take it into Microsoft Word. Remembering I'm looking for a border, I'm looking for orientation, so I can add a north arrow, a legend, title, and then scale and the source for the map. That's the sort of things I'd be looking at. If I just pasted in that image, I would have a lovely image on a page in a Word document. That's very good, but it doesn't tell the reader much, but it is a good start. So what I am going to do is I'm going to show you how I turn this from an image into a decent map. So first thing is, if you use shape outline, you can give yourself a border. I'm going to change mine to black. I'm going to very quickly use the weight, and there's some different styles there as well, but I'm just going to go for a simple style with a reasonably heavy black border. Because this is going to go into a report, I would have a figure number underneath or above it with the title of the map. So I don't need to title this map specifically for my purpose today for one of the reports for grade 11 and 12. Orientation, well, I do need a north arrow. So there's a number of ways of doing that. You could go and find an image on the internet, or you could do something as simple as this. You can get yourself an arrow I'm going to just quickly draw it like so. I'm going to rotate it so it's pointing northwards because that is the actual orientation of the map that I started with. I'm going to pop it into the corner and I am going to put a very quick text box above it. I'm just going to click off actually. And then I'm going to put a text box just above the arrow. So I can just do that here. I'm going to put in N. I might make that bold. And I should be able to drag that right in above the north arrow. And if I'm lucky, it'll line up right above it. Now, that is just a little bit on a dark line there. I'm not real happy with it. So I'm going to grab both parts of that. And I'm going to move it so I can see a nice north arrow. But probably the best spot for it would be up the top corner there, out of harm's way. So that's my orientation. I've got my border. Now, if I go back to my original map, it actually has a legend here. So I am actually going to borrow that legend. Now, there are some things like Queensland thematic maps that allow you to modify the legend to make it more complex and to suit your data. I strongly suggest that if Queensland thematic maps works for what you need, but I just used ID Community today. I'm going to copy that, and what I'm doing is I'm building a set of layers here of information. So I'm going to paste it on. I'm going to put it in the bottom right-hand corner, and guess what I'm going to do with it? I'm going to put shape outline on it. So hopefully that did what I wanted. And it does. There we go. I now have a legend in the bottom corner. Of course, remembering I will have a title down in the figure, so this will actually make some sense what it is. So now I'm good. Legend's done. Title's done. Scale. Well, sometimes the original program will have a scale on it. Now, this one here does not. So there's a couple of things you could do with that. You could choose, and this is what I would do with this one. I would put in a scale bar down the bottom with scale unknown. Some other programs, and I will show you what that looks like. So I've got scale unknown, and I probably should put in a colon there. I'm going to stretch out a little. It's a little large, so I'm going to make it just a tiny touch smaller on my text. I'm going to give it, fill the shape of the actual little text box with white, and of course put a little border around it. And now I have scale there as well. Now, it's not perfect. You can put it a couple other ways. I can make the box a little smaller, but for just making it quick, that will do just fine for the moment. It is not the perfect situation to have an unknown scale, but you at least acknowledge that there was a scale to be known. The last thing would be a source. Well, in this case, I would use the source from the actual mapping program that I was using, ID Community. I would source it from this year. I'd be saying 2016 ABS data from the Rockhampton Regional Council. There's a number of ways of doing that. That would be in my figure title. So that's a very quick one there. What I could do, I'm just going to very quickly show you a second program that's very nifty for getting data and doing mapping. And it's called National Map, and it has a bunch of different ones that sort of shoot off that you can use. I'm going to show you a couple other tricks with scale out of those sort of programs as well. So if I bring that up, this is an example I've also done for Rockhampton. In this case, the data set that I have in it, this is called Auran, but it actually comes out of the national map that I use, and you can link on related maps like this, and there's a whole bunch of different programs. Auran particularly provides data sets on urban infrastructure for urban researchers, so I've used that because it does more of the smaller scale stuff here in Rockhampton, and I'm able to then, in this case, pull up population density. But this one, as you'll notice, has a scale bar down the bottom. So one thing you can do is just cut and paste the scale bar. It does have an orientation up the top, but it's not real easy to see this one. So that one's not particularly effective, but you could just do something like this. I'm going to cut and paste the scale bar, and I could just copy that if I was using this on the correct map. Obviously, this will not be the correct scale, and you could just paste that maybe down here and have a scale bar, or maybe over to this side. So that is one way to have a really nice looking map. Now, how do you get this into your document in Word? Well, first up, you could technically select all of it. Everything's highlighted. I could right click and then group everything together. and that turns it into one group, and I can now just move it around together. Another way to do that is to then just highlight everything and then snip it again as another snip. Now that's a double snip. It's not my preferred method. I usually take it as a group, but it does work. And also, actually I probably should have that unselected first, but just for sake of showing it, I'll just highlight that. And I now have a map that could go into my report. I would do it again personally because you can see a little bit hanging around on the left-hand side and the title. So I'm going to just do it again. First up, I'm going to unselect it this time. And you can easily create some nice looking maps to go into reports very, very simply by just taking a little bit of care here. Now, one nice thing with this is you can add a lot to this in PowerPoint. You might want to put titles in here and text in your own data. So you might have done some surveys in here and you decide, right, I'd like to actually add a survey here for the Kawana area, and I might put in a little bit of data here, and you might put in a second little category down here, and you might put in number of people who feel safe after you did a survey, and you could put in a little piece of information tacked in here as well. That would be adding some of your own data and transforming this from a map with one layer to multiple layers with your own personalized data. So I'm hoping this helps. It's one way of doing it. It's a very nice way of making really nice maps without doing owning the program, without spending a lot of time becoming an expert in the mapping program. It can be used for any type of place where you get mapping information. Obviously, doing your own transformation with geolocated data sources is an improvement, but certainly for your data reports in particular, this is a good source, because many of these, and I'll just show you, many of these programs have the data with it to actually show you, because each of these do have a data point. If I look at the same map and I go to analysis for the exact same area for the exact same data set for Rockhampton, you will see that it'll actually talk about actually the data itself. I can then export that data into a table and graph it and transform that data. And you can see that each of the areas of Rockhampton are represented here, plus regional Queensland, Queensland and Australia. So I could do a comparative analysis comparing Rockhampton's overall data and maybe even parts of town that have high, medium mortgage repayments compared to the state. Now, why was that important for my one overall? Well, there's some tables here too, but you're better off doing a better job with it yourself. Why was it important overall? Well, my guys were looking at flooding, and if you look at it, the cheap houses are often the houses that are being flooded. The only place that is not really cheap is right in the center of town, and they're high-rise buildings. So with a little bit of ground truthing, they would be able to go and find that out. Most of the really expensive areas tend to be up here. It's called the Range. It's on a hill. Obviously, it's not going to get flooded, because the flooding occurs all around Rockhampton. And then the northern areas, which also do not get flooded, except for just this little patch in here, tend to be housing is in higher areas in Rockhampton. And that sort of lays out that the people who would need the most help, the most vulnerable, will be closest to the flood areas and also have the lowest rents because their houses are not worth as much. So insurance would also possibly be a problem, and you can certainly do inferencing from that point. Okay, again, hopefully it was of help to you, and I look forward to seeing some fantastic reports.